You think you understand time. You don't. You believe you know what it is because it feels familiar, because it moves forward while you stand still, because clocks behave the same way every day of your life. That sense of familiarity is precisely the problem. It has convinced you that time is simple, when in fact it is one of the least intuitive structures the universe permits. Your confidence does not come from understanding. It comes from repetition, and repetition is not comprehension. You assume time is a background, something that exists independently of everything else. Events happen inside it. Objects move through it. Causes precede effects. This assumption feels so stable that questioning it feels unnecessary. Yet the universe has never shown any obligation to preserve what feels necessary to the human mind. It preserves only what is consistent. And consistency, at a cosmic scale, does not care how experience feels from the inside. The first discomfort appears when you realize that time does not behave the same everywhere, not metaphorically, not psychologically, physically. The passage you experience as uniform depends on motion and gravity. This is not a curiosity, it is a structural property. Two identical clocks, built to agree forever, will permanently disagree if separated under different conditions. Neither is broken, neither is mistaken. They are both correct, and yet they no longer share the same time. If time were universal, this would be impossible. The fact that it happens means the assumption itself is wrong. At this point, most people retreat to a compromise. They accept that time can stretch or compress, but still believe it flows. Faster here, slower there, always forward, always present. This preserves intuition while conceding the evidence. But the universe does not permit partial concessions. Once time loses its universality, it also loses its authority as a single, moving present. There is no global now. No moment that exists everywhere at once. The present you feel so strongly is not a feature of the cosmos. It is a local effect produced by your position, your motion, and the limits of how information reaches you. This is where contradiction becomes unavoidable. If there is no universal present, then the division between past, present, and future cannot be fundamental. It cannot be built into reality itself. It must be something else. Something emergent, something that depends on perspective rather than structure. The universe, at its deepest level, does not label events as already happened or not yet happened. It simply contains them, all of them, ordered not by a flowing river of time, but by relationships that do not privilege direction. This is difficult to accept because it conflicts with causality as you experience it. You act, then consequences follow. You remember yesterday but not tomorrow. This asymmetry feels absolute. Yet when the equations describing the universe are examined without human preference, they show no such bias. They function just as well forward as backward. They do not distinguish between what you call past and what you call future. The laws do not insist on direction. The direction you experience must therefore come from somewhere else. The deeper mechanism reveals itself slowly. Time's arrow is not imposed by the universe. It emerges from conditions, specifically from the state of order and disorder. The universe began in a condition of extraordinarily low disorder, not because it had to, but because it did. From that improbable starting point, disorder increases. Processes that increase disorder are overwhelmingly more likely than those that decrease it. Memory, decay, aging, and irreversibility all follow from this imbalance. They do not define time, they exploit it. This means that what you experience as the flow of time is not time moving. It is information degrading in one direction. You remember the past because the past left records. You cannot remember the future because the future has not yet produced any. The distinction feels profound, but it is derivative. Remove the records, and the difference collapses. The universe does not progress from past to future. It simply occupies states, some more ordered than others. Once this is understood, a final discomfort begins to form. If time does not flow, if the present is not universal, and if the past and future are not fundamentally different, then the idea of time beginning or ending becomes unstable. A beginning implies a moment before which nothing existed, but before already assumes time. Likewise, an end assumes a final moment after which nothing follows. These intuitions rely on the very structure that has already been dismantled. What was discovered is not an answer you can explain comfortably. It is a limit, a recognition that time, as you experience it, is not the framework of reality, but a consequence of it. The universe does not move through time. Time is how certain processes are arranged when viewed from within the universe under specific conditions. Outside those conditions, the distinction loses meaning. If this is true, then the most unsettling question is not what time is, but why you are so certain it behaves the way it does. After recognizing this, which part of your certainty about time feels least defensible now? Your confidence may have weakened, but it has not disappeared. It usually reforms around a new assumption that even if time is strange, even if it does not flow universally, it must still be something real that exists independently of observation. You may now accept that clocks disagree, that simultaneity dissolves, that the present fractures into local versions, yet you still imagine time as a hidden structure underneath everything. Invisible, perhaps distorted, but fundamentally there. This assumption feels safer than the alternative. It allows you to keep time as an object rather than a condition. That safety is misplaced. The discomfort deepens when you realize that time cannot be separated from space. They are not two entities interacting. They are one structure with different aspects. This is not a matter of naming, it is a matter of consequence. Once space and time are unified, neither can exist independently. Remove space and time has no meaning. Remove time and space collapses into incoherence. Events are no longer located somewhere and sometime. They are simply relations within a four-dimensional structure that does not privilege direction or sequence. This undermines another intuition you may not have noticed you were relying on, that the universe evolves. Evolution implies a sequence of states unfolding. But in a space-time description, the universe does not unfold. It exists. The entire history, from what you call the beginning to what you imagine as the end, is contained within the structure. Nothing is added. Nothing moves forward. There is no external clock against which the universe progresses. The notion of cosmic evolution is a perspective-dependent description, not a fundamental process. This is where resistance usually intensifies. If the universe does not evolve, then what are you experiencing? You feel change, you observe motion, you witness aging, decay, and transformation. These experiences are undeniable. The mistake is assuming they require time to be flowing. They do not. They require only that different states exist in a particular order, and that conscious systems are constrained to access them asymmetrically. You do not move through time. You are embedded in a sequence of states that contains you. At this point, contradiction becomes explicit. If the universe simply exists as a complete structure, then the future is not something that comes into being. It is already there, just not accessible in the same way. This does not mean it is predetermined in the way people fear. It means that determinism and indeterminism are not properties of time, but of the laws governing transitions between states. The presence of uncertainty does not restore a flowing present. It only limits what can be known from within a given state. Quantum uncertainty is often invoked here as a rescue, as if randomness reintroduces openness into time. It does not. Randomness changes predictability, not existence. Whether an outcome is fixed or probabilistic, It still occupies a location within the structure. Probability does not create time. It only describes distributions across possible states. The universe does not wait to see what happens. Waiting is a human projection, born from ignorance of information not yet available. The deeper mechanism reveals itself with unsettling clarity. Time is not a stage on which reality performs. It is a bookkeeping device that emerges when systems are complex enough to store records. Where records exist, asymmetry appears. Where asymmetry appears, direction is inferred. But inference is not ontology. The universe does not privilege the direction you call forward. You do, because your memories accumulate in one direction and not the other. This leads to a conclusion that feels almost hostile to common sense. The feeling of becoming, of moving from what was to what will be, is not a property of the universe. It is a property of conscious systems embedded in a universe with particular boundary conditions. Change is real. Experience is real. But the flow you attribute to time is not. It is the sensation produced when a mind traces a path through a static structure and mistakes that path for motion of the structure itself. Once this is understood, even the language you use begins to fail. Words like before, after, already, and not yet lose their universal authority. They apply locally, approximately, and conditionally. The universe does not contradict them because it never agreed to them in the first place. They are tools evolved for survival, not for truth. The unavoidable conclusion presses closer now. If time is not fundamental, then many of the questions you ask about it are malformed. Asking what happened before the beginning or what will occur after the end assumes a temporal framework that does not apply. These questions feel deep because intuition insists they must have answers. The universe responds with silence, not out of mystery, but because the questions themselves are incoherent at that level. This is not ignorance, it is a boundary. And boundaries do not disappear because they are uncomfortable. If the universe does not progress and time does not flow, then what exactly are you assuming is moving when you say your life is moving forward? At this stage, many people attempt a final reconstruction. They concede that time may not be fundamental, that the universe may not evolve in the way intuition suggests, but they insist that meaning requires direction. Without a forward motion, they argue, existence collapses into abstraction. Purpose dissolves. Experience becomes illusory. This reaction is understandable, but it reveals a deeper attachment that has not yet been examined. You are not defending time. You are defending orientation. And orientation is not guaranteed by reality. The universe does not arrange itself to preserve narrative. It does not ensure that events line up in a way that feels meaningful from the inside. Meaning is not violated by this indifference. It is simply not enforced. Once this is accepted, another contradiction becomes visible. If time is emergent and not fundamental, then the laws governing the universe cannot depend on time in the way they appear to. Yet nearly every description you use relies on temporal language. Causes produce effects, states evolve, systems decay. This language works because it is practical, not because it is ultimate. The deeper mechanism is subtle and easy to miss. When physicists describe change, they are not describing time itself. They are describing correlations between states. One configuration is related to another. From within the system, these correlations are experienced sequentially. From outside that perspective, sequence is just structure. Nothing compels the structure to be traversed. Traversal is an internal phenomenon. This distinction matters because it removes the final refuge of intuition, the belief that something must be happening now. The present feels unavoidable. It feels like the only place reality can occur. Yet once simultaneity dissolves, The present becomes a local approximation, stitched together by limited information. Different observers do not share it. Different regions of the universe do not align with it. There is no privileged slice of existence labeled current. There is only a network of events, each equally real within the structure. This realization carries an implication that is rarely confronted directly. If all events exist within the structure, then existence is not something that comes into being. It is something that is arranged. Birth and death are not boundaries where reality switches on or off. They are boundaries of perspective. A conscious system enters a region of the structure where it can register states and later exits that region. The structure itself remains unchanged by this transition. This is often misinterpreted as a denial of experience. It is the opposite. Experience is preserved but stripped of cosmic privilege. Your experiences matter to you because you are embedded in a particular configuration of the universe. They do not matter to the universe because nothing is required to. The universe does not witness itself. It does not remember. It does not anticipate. These are local phenomena, not universal ones. Another attempt at rescue usually follows. If time is not fundamental, perhaps causality is. Perhaps cause and effect restore direction where time fails. But causality, too, depends on perspective. It describes constraints on how states relate, not a temporal order imposed from outside. In some descriptions of the universe, what appears as cause in one frame appears as effect in another. The underlying relationships remain consistent. The direction does not. Once again, intuition collapses where structure remains intact. The unsettling part is not that the universe lacks a flow of time. It is that nothing is missing because of it. Reality does not become incomplete, it becomes indifferent. The discomfort you feel arises from the realization that your most basic assumptions were never consulted. The universe did not evolve to align with them. They evolved to cope with a very narrow set of conditions. When this is fully understood, the question of time's origin transforms. It is no longer about when time began, but why conditions existed that made time appear at all. Why did the universe begin in a state of such low disorder that an arrow could emerge? Why does complexity arise in a way that allows memory, anticipation, and experience? These questions are not answered by restoring time to a fundamental role. They are answered by accepting that time is a consequence, not a cause. This leads to a conclusion that is difficult to articulate without resistance. The universe does not need time to exist. Time needs the universe to be structured in a particular way. Change does not require flow. Flow is how change feels when you are confined to one path through a much larger structure. Once this is recognized, the fear that time's unreality empties life of significance loses its force. Significance was never guaranteed by the universe. It was constructed within it. The absence of a cosmic clock does not erase experience. It reveals its limits. If time is not something the universe possesses, but something you infer, then what are you actually relying on when you insist that the present moment is uniquely real? By now, there is little left of the original intuition, yet one final assumption often remains untouched. Even after accepting that time does not flow, that the present is not universal, and that the universe does not evolve in the way experience suggests, you may still believe that explanation must eventually restore comfort. That somewhere beneath these conclusions, there must be a deeper layer that reassembles reality into something intuitively coherent. This expectation is the last illusion to collapse. The universe does not resolve discomfort, it only remains consistent. When the structure of space-time is taken seriously, explanation does not move toward familiarity, it moves toward limits. You reach a point where asking for further explanation no longer produces clarity, not because knowledge is insufficient, but because the demand itself exceeds what structure can provide. Time, in this sense, is not misunderstood. It is mislocated. You keep searching for it as an ingredient of reality when it is better understood as a description that becomes valid only under restricted conditions. This mislocation is revealed most sharply when confronting the earliest moments of the universe. The instinctive question is when it began, but when already presupposes time as a backdrop. Remove that assumption, and the question changes character. The beginning is no longer a moment within time. It is a boundary of description. Asking what came before it is like asking what lies north of the North Pole. The error is not factual, it is structural. At this boundary, even causality becomes fragile. Causes require temporal order, effects require sequence. At the most fundamental level, these distinctions dissolve. The universe does not begin because something caused it to begin. It begins because the description allows no extension beyond that boundary. This is not an admission of ignorance. It is a recognition of coherence. Beyond that point, the concepts you rely on no longer apply. This is what makes the discovery so difficult to explain. It does not replace one intuitive picture with another. It removes the necessity of a picture altogether. The universe does not provide a narrative that starts, unfolds, and concludes. It provides a structure that simply is. Narratives are constructed inside it by systems that cannot access the whole at once. Once this is understood, the question of fate loses its emotional charge. If the future already exists within the structure, it does not trap you, it contextualizes you. Your actions are not erased by this realization, they are located. You act because that action is part of the structure. The feeling of choice arises because the structure includes systems that evaluate alternatives without access to their outcomes. The absence of temporal flow does not negate agency. It explains why agency feels limited. This explanation is unsatisfying only if you expect the universe to justify itself in human terms. It does not. It does not care whether time feels real to you. It only maintains internal consistency. What you call explanation reaches its endpoint not with reassurance but with silence, not because nothing can be said, but because nothing further is required. At this point, even the word discovery becomes misleading. Nothing new was added to the universe. Something was removed from your interpretation of it. The idea that time moves, that the present is special, that reality waits to become, all dissolve without leaving a replacement. What remains is not mystery, but structure, complete, indifferent, and unconcerned with whether it aligns with intuition. This is why it feels impossible to explain to someone who has not confronted it. Explanation relies on shared assumptions. Once those assumptions are gone, language itself becomes approximate. You can gesture toward the structure, you can describe its consequences, but you cannot make it feel intuitive, because intuition evolved for survival within time, not for understanding its absence. The final conclusion is unavoidable. Time is not something the universe passes through. It is something certain observers infer because of how they are embedded within the universe. Remove the observer's limitations, and time loses its authority. What remains does not flow, does not wait, and does not become. It simply exists. After reaching this point, the question is no longer whether time is real, but why you ever expected reality to align with how it feels from inside it. Which assumption about your experience feels hardest to let go now? If after all this, your feeling wasn't one of comfort but of instability, then the video fulfilled its purpose. The idea was never to offer simple answers, but to show how much what we call time sustains certainties that are rarely questioned. When these certainties crumble, something more honest remains. The awareness that reality is far less intuitive than it seems. If this content made you realize that perhaps you never understood time in the way you imagined, write the phrase, "Perhaps time never flowed," in our comments. And if you want to continue exploring ideas that dismantle the obvious, challenge intuition, and reveal the limits of reality as it truly is, subscribe to the channel. Here, the goal isn't to reassure, it's to confront what you believe you know.